All right. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Um, I I guess you could say I'm the accidental cheesemaker. Uh, we got into, I was very much a city girl and not interested in farming at all, but we had a son who needed goat's milk. And this is probably the most common story you'll hear about people that get into goats. A child that needs goat's milk. And that's what we did. But I told my husband, I want nothing to do with it. I'll take care of the milk. The rest is up to him. But somehow that didn't stay that way. And after we hobby milked for 7 years, I started the cheese operation. Um, it was a learning process. I tried to start out slowly and work my way bigger, but it's kind of tough to manage, and the market and demand changes every year. But I really enjoyed the goats. I really enjoyed making cheese. But the business part I wasn't very good at. So like Maggie said, I still milk goats because I just enjoy them. I enjoy milking. I thrive on that routine of getting up in the morning, taking care of my animals, milking them, managing the milk. I do occasionally make cheese more for my family than my own self now, but it was a very life-changing experience. Let's just put it that way. Um, Kevin?
Okay, well, I, for most of my childhood, wanted to be a farmer. And I grew up on a farm for part of my childhood from age 8 to 13. Lived on a community farm in central Minnesota, which is where I fell in love with milk cows and had a few sheep in 4-H and did gardening and rode along on the tractor a bunch. And then my family moved to a suburb of first string suburb of Minneapolis, and when I was in middle school and throughout high school, and I kept yearning for the farm that whole time. And then following graduation from high school, I spent 3 years in Germany working on three different dairy farms for a year each. And the three farms had varying levels of on-farm processing, which is where that idea sort of first started to enter into my brain. I didn't really learn how to make cheese there. The cheesemaker on the first farm would write down tasks like flip cheese at 3 p.m. or something like that. Or sometimes I'd help her cleaning the aging room or brushing cheeses or specific tasks. But I never did, cheese making from start to finish. I was there to learn about farming, and I was 18 years old. I was interested in tractors and cows and being strong and cool and whatever. The second farm, I actually was making quark, which is like a fresh soft cheese, every once a week. And so that was my first experience of once or twice a week. That was my first experience of processing on a commercial scale. The third farm was, I guess there wasn't any on-farm processing. That was the biggest dairy. They also had a lot of vegetables. And then after completing that apprenticeship, I came back to the U.S. to Minnesota, went to college, got a degree in biology, met my wife, got married, and she uh, went to Cornell University for graduate school. So we ended up going out there, bought a small acreage and a cow. Uh, and um, well, it turns out that one cow is way too much milk for two people to drink. And so I got some cheese books and just started experimenting. And I still have notes from every single batch I made starting in 2007. And so I treated it like a lab experiment. I followed the directions as carefully as I could. If I made a change, I made one change in each batch, and I'd write it down, and then I'd take tasting notes. Um, and then so that was about a year and a half. Year and a half, I think we had that cow. Then we moved to Iowa. Had to sell Honey, the cow. It seemed a little bit too. We didn't have a farm we were moving to, so we sold her before we left. But for a few years while we were living in town, we had a milk share from Picket Fence Creamery in Woodward, and I think we got 4 gallons of whole milk a week, and we'd have 1 gallon for us to use and 3 gallons for cheese making. So I'd make one batch a week out of 3 gallons of whole milk, and they have non-homogenized milk, so that helps with the cheese making process, because having homogenized milk, it beats up the fats and the proteins and everything, and it just won't really work right. So keep that in mind if you're ever going to try cheese making yourself. So I did a lot more experimentation, and at that point I kind of knew I wanted to start my own cheese making business. There were a lot of iterations along the way, but it's kind of, I've known I wanted to be a farmer for a lot of years. Dairy was always kind of a part of that. The cheese making kind of came in as a way to sort of add value and start small, and so forth. So fast forward to we moved here to Lost Lake Farm in 2012, and we built our facilities that has a milking parlor, and then also the cheese making facilities, all under one roof, and started making cheese commercially here in 2016. We have 19 cows. We are 100% grass fed, and we milk once a day, and turn all of the milk into cheese on farm, and sell it mostly directly. We sell to a few restaurants and a few stores, but not a lot of wholesale. Don't work with distributors or anything. So that's my story. I want to move now into the next segment of our conversation, where I'm going to outline the cheese making process a little bit. Now, I have never worked with goats or sheep's milk, which Lois has, so she's going to jump in if she has changes there, or she's going to share her perspective from that, and also talk a little bit about the how that is different from the makeup and what that means process-wise. So you always start with milk, and good quality milk makes everything go so much better. So that means from healthy animals on a good diet, and
Cleanliness.
100%. Yes, cleanliness from start to finish is important. Clean animals, clean milking area, and clean milking equipment. Because if you have healthy animals, then you'll have healthier udders and healthier teats, which because if they if they're fighting, even on a small level, if they're fighting a little bit of an infection, they'll have white blood cells, which we kind of fighting, helping to ward off that infection. We call that somatic cells. And if there's always going to be a certain amount in the milk, but if you get over a certain amount, it's going to cause problems specifically for your coagulation. So the fresher the milk, also the better, because pretty much the minute it's out of the animal, it starts to degrade. But I've found I can go up to 7 days, and it's still fine for how the process is I'm doing. Of course, a lot of places will do milk and then go straight to the cheese vat. I don't know if that's how you did it.
Well, let me jump in that I think it also depends on the kind of milk you're using, because goat's milk, the fatty acids in goat's milk, as they deteriorate, as the fats deteriorate over time, which is perfectly normal, the fatty acids left can cause goaty flavors. And I personally very much dislike a goaty flavored milk or cheese. If that's all you've ever had in goat cheese, I'm sorry, I apologize for that. But holding raw milk for any length of time, I'd say beyond 48 hours, that process automatically starts. It's perfectly normal, but if you don't want a goaty tasting cheese, you do. So that's why I made cheese every single day from morning and evening milk combined. You do have to be much more careful with goat's milk and with sheep's milk, because the off flavors happen more readily, I think, partly because the fats are smaller and they're not in those big globules like cow's milk, which means, that we don't have separation problems, but they're smaller and they break down faster and you get more off flavors. And I think as Americans also, we're used to the cow's milk flavors. The fatty acids from cow's milk are not offensive to us. They're normal, but we're not used to goat milk and sheep milk flavors. So I'll just throw that in there, that I think it depends on what milk you're working with, how long you can hold that milk.
Yeah. And, for us, part of what determines how frequently I can make a batch, I have 100-gallon cheese
Yeah.
vat pasteurizer.
Mhm.
I cannot do any less than 50 gallons. So I'm doing all pasteurized milk cheeses, meaning that I pasteurize the milk, which is heating the milk to a specified, 145 degrees
Right.
Fahrenheit for 30 minutes is a vat pasteurizing. There are other short time versions that we don't have the technology to do, so we won't talk
Right.
about that
And
today.
it's very expensive to do.
Yeah. And so at times, depending on how many cows I have milking and how much they're producing, it might take me 7 days to get
Mhm.
50 gallons. And so that's why I've had to find that out,
Right.
is because, and then the other thing is that, like, I don't know how you made cheese every day. It is,
That's what I say. Yours is a much saner way to do things. Yes. It's insane. Yeah.
yeah, that's insane. That's a good way to burn out, if you ask me. Because
Case in point.
milking every day is hard enough. Then you add in making cheese every day, especially, you're talking 7 days a week. That's
Yep.
a lot of work, and life happens and other things happen, and you have to work around that because it's but then also consider, you were also doing that seasonally. So how many months of the
Yes,
year
that's
was
right.
that?
9 to 10.
9 to 10. So
And
still
I
most of the year.
Yeah, I think I would say that I got to about the 10-year thing, that probably that season got shorter because I burned
Yeah.
out faster, and I would go to once a day milking a lot sooner than, like, in my first 5 or 6 years, I milked twice a day as long as I possibly could. But I learned, for my own sanity, it made more sense because then sometimes I would have that 48 hours and maybe make cheese every other day. And but yeah, it's a much more sane way to do it, but you can't do it with goat's milk. So there you go.
Yeah. So we're milking and making cheese year round. And so
You need to
part of
be
that is
sane.
we're spreading it. Yeah. So that's part of why I milk once a day.
Hmm.
But I am
Smart.
sacrificing some production that way. I guess we need to move on a little bit to, we've talked a lot about milking and and so
Yeah,
forth.
to cheese.
So
Okay.
So we talked about pasteurization, and then so whether you're pasteurized or not, then you bring it, either you're bringing it up if you're going straight from, if you're like buying milk that's already pasteurized and it's at refrigeration temp, or if you're pasteurized, you're cooling it down, bring it to whatever temperature is the proper temperature for your starter bacteria culture. And Maggie, could you pull up picture
21, I
number
think. 21.
21 is I was gonna say the one with the little cups. 24. Picture 24.
Oh, cups. I
Just,
wondered what those
yeah,
were.
just to
Okay.
show. Yeah, so this is a picture of 3 of the cultures I use. So these are freeze-dried cultures. So those are different ones. And so this is for, that's for like 75 gallons worth of milk, right there, that amount. So that's it's really not very much. So the top one that was the most, that's a mix of bacteria. The both top 2. The other one was what you call a I'm blanking, when you add a second bacteria,
An aroma.
yeah, essentially, yeah,
Aroma for
aroma culture. So it's
right.
adding extra flavors. It's not the primary one that's doing all your
It's not going to
acid
cause the
development and
coagulation, but yeah.
yeah, and then the third one was actually that was a geotrichum yeast culture,
My favorite.
which I use as an add-on for sort of as a stabilizer. I don't actually do any geotrichum
Rinded.
rinded ones, but I use it in my white mold cheeses and my blue cheeses as sort of a stabilizer. So, and the mold cultures, which are the other type. So the geotrichum is a yeast. The mold cultures are what you would have even less of. It's like a very tiny amount that you're adding for. So molds like the blue mold for a blue cheese, or the white mold for a white mold cheese like a camembert or a brie. So now if you could bring up picture number 21, Maggie. So that's in that picture, I have added culture to the surface of the milk. So I let it sit on the milk surface, and it's about 90 degrees is the temperature that I have it at. And so the dark that you're seeing, and it makes cool swirling patterns, that's the blue mold culture. So it actually looks kind of like a dark bluish green color. And so I let it kind of dissolve on the surface for about 5 minutes, then stir it in gently. And then depending on what kind of cheese you're making at that point, then you let it basically, it's starting to do its
wake up and start acting. Yeah. Doing its bacterial job. Right.
It's starting to multiply. It's starting to, now I'm totally blanking when it's turning the lactose into lactase and lactic acid, and fermentation is starting to ferment.
Right.
And so for most of my cheeses that I do, that's about an hour that it leaves. But I have some that I leave them only for about 5 minutes before I add. Then the next one, actually, I don't think I have a picture of adding rennet, but so some cheeses then are acid coagulated, which I don't do any acid coagulated. I don't know if you did any, Lois.
Virtually everything I did was an acid coagulated cheese. So
well, maybe you want to talk about what acid coagulated means
Okay.
for a little bit here before I
Well,
move on to rennet.
okay. Well, and I did use some rennet. Almost every acid coagulated cheese, you use a little rennet just so you don't have failures. But we call it a lactic cheese. You might hear that term, a lactic cheese. So you're going to achieve you're going from fluid milk to solid curd by driving the pH down. So a milk pH might be 6.9 when you start. You're going to add the starter culture, which is bacteria. It's going to start eating through that lactose and creating lactic acid as a byproduct, and that's what brings the pH down. That sounds really technical, but it just happens all by itself. You just have to learn to monitor it. And
there are bacteria there are fermentation bacteria in raw milk. If you leave it sit out,
yes,
it will. That's what curdled milk is. That's acid coagulated from the native cultures of bacteria that are in the milk.
Right. Yeah. So if you were working with raw milk, you'd have to compensate. But that's why we're lucky to have pH meters and things like that. And I found from personal experience making I guess what you would consider my most well-known cheese that I learned to make in Italy, I had to monitor that pH. If I was off by even 0.5, the whole batch was ruined. I had to learn when to catch it, to do it, to get it to coagulate properly and drain properly. If the temperature was off 1 or 2 degrees, it could ruin the whole batch. So I guess that's kind of why I like lactic cheeses, because they're challenging and they're tricky. And if you're doing it every day, it gets really boring. And so having it vary a little bit and change and trying to do a different batch every day made it a little more interesting for me. The main reason that I do those, though, was because that's pretty much what most goat cheeses are. Almost any goat cheese you'll find in a shop will be a lactic cheese. It's a better fit with the structure of goat milk. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess honestly, part of why I haven't ventured into lactic cheeses is because they're so fickle.
Mm-hmm.
and
And you know what? It'd be a good fit for you because I'm not the person who wrote down every single thing I did. I just get a really good batch and go, oh, what did I do? Now I have to remember. So you should try that. You'd be good at it.
well, and so I'm good at paying attention to details when I'm there, and then we're going to move into, hopefully we'll have time to move into aging later, but
it's not looking like it.
No, it's not looking like we'll make it that far. But in the aging process, I tend to have less management intensive cheeses,
Yes.
because those are also more fickle there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know. I guess managing a dairy farm and hogs and all these things, it's
And
when
you have small children.
well, yes.
That your dad too. That makes a difference. My kid was going into high school, and it was part of my reason to be so intensive was so I wouldn't be a helicopter mom.
Yeah. So with rennet, you're coagulating using an enzymatic process. So it is basically like a chemical scissors that is cutting the bond between the
calcium ion
and the casein protein, well, we don't need to get too technical into the, I often forget the terminology, and especially when I'm talking in front of people. And it looks like Lois has frozen up, so I'm just going to keep talking about the process. Oh, she's back.
There I am. Go ahead. Sorry.
And so rennet is traditional rennet comes from the stomach of a young animal that is still drinking milk, from the stomach lining, and so that's what they use to digest milk. And but there are also some vegetarian rennet, some are plant derived. Most of what is used is microbial, so it's essentially chemically the same as rennet from a calf or something like that. I use, for my longer aged cheeses, I use the traditional veal rennet, and for my fresher cheeses, I use microbial rennet.
That's exactly
And
what I did as well. So
so that sets for, depending on the pH that that you start it with, and the curd consistency you're going for, 45 minutes to an hour generally, I would say is curd set. It can be longer, generally
mine was
not
all
much
night
less.
long. Mine was all night long. I set it
Right, so
after
because you're
milking.
doing the acid.
Right.
Um, so let's see now. I just want to show, checking, Maggie, if you could bring up picture 19, and then when that, and then next bring up picture 20 after that. So you're checking the, this is checking the consistency of the curd. This is what is called in the books I read a clean break test.
Perfect. Yep.
So you're basically making a cut and seeing how well the how hard, how brittle or soft it is, for different cheeses. I'm going for a little bit harder or softer. This looks like it's probably one of my harder cheeses. And you can see the whey is starting to push out there. So any cut surface, you are the whey is starting to get pushed out, and the whey is the liquid portion that has all the dissolved sugars and salts and everything that's in the milk. And I guess we jumped ahead from cutting the curd. Oh, I guess that was
12, but that's all right.
12. That's okay. We don't need to go in. So you cut the curd into varying sizes of cubes, generally, is what you're going for. And so the smaller you're cutting it, the quicker it's going to push the whey out. And so basically you're concentrating the solids from the liquids. And this is when I'm starting to stir it again. And so you could see it, because it's already, the curds are starting to shrink, because they start out as cubes, and now they've already started to shrink a little bit. And they'll get smaller and smaller and then, depending on the cheese, you usually, a lot of cheeses, you will be applying heat as you're stirring it as well. So you're stirring it basically to keep the solids from sinking too much to the bottom, to keep it even. And so that all the different curds are pushing way out evenly, and um, and to keep the temperature evenly, because if you're cooking, the temperature is coming from outside, and so you don't want what's on the bottom or on the edges. My vat is jacketed, so it's having warmth from the walls, meaning it has a hot water jacket, so
it's like a double boiler.
More even heat.
Yeah. And can I just jump in, because you're talking about this, that with a lactic cheese like I made that sat all night long, and with goat milk, I would cut the curd, but I would never ever stir it for a lactic curd. So I would cut the curd, and then I would ladle it and drain it immediately. I would never, for a soft cheese, which means a fresh cheese, or the soft ripened cheeses that I make. I'll have some pictures of those later. there was no stirring involved. It was just cut. And with goat milk, the coagulation is, because the proteins and fats are a lot smaller, the coagulation is much more fragile. So again, it's super fussy. You have to be extremely careful, and you can't be too rough with the curd. If you're too rough with the curd, it'll all fall apart. So that it's amazing that the processes are basically exactly the same. The only variations are in time, temperature, and how you handle the curd. So it's the kind of cheeses that Kevin makes are like almost the total opposite of the kind that I make, but we both made cheese. So
Yeah, and I remember that from when I visited you, how you were, I was watching you ladling. I was there for that stage, and you
uh-huh.
were carefully ladling, and you were saying, "Yeah, I've had other people help me before, but I just can't let anybody else do this step because it's too important to do it just the right way, or else it'll ruin the whole batch because it's such a fragile
Right.
curd." And so when I make the softer cheeses like a camembert or blue, I'm also being
Mm-hmm.
pretty careful, but I do stir it a little bit, and I let it I wait about an hour before I do, because
Let it pre-drain a little bit that
let
way.
it
Yeah.
pre-drain a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. Yeah, so you're having probably a higher moisture end cheese, or you're having a
Yeah.
little bit more of the draining happening on the table in the form.
Yeah,
So
sometimes it could be 4 to 5 days on the draining table. The exterior mold is already growing before I move it to the aging. Yeah.
So how important is for that is the temperature and humidity in your make room?
Uh, it's pretty important. The temperature if the temperature drops too low, it'll slow draining, and I can end up with a crappy batch. The salting timing, which we haven't got to yet, was also very important because the salt facilitates draining, and we need 2 hours. But salt facilitates draining. It depends on how you apply the salt. But for me, directly adding the salt to the curd the next day, I could control the rate of drainage somewhat with the salt as well. Because I had a central air and heat in my make room, I could regulate the temperature pretty well.
Yeah, but salt is the other role that salt is playing is it's slowing down that fermentation,
Hmm.
because you don't want the pH to drop too far. So that's the other reason that timing of adding salt is important, because um, and for any cheese, the time that you add salt, or the time that you're putting it in the brine, um, is really important. We're talking about draining for a while. Do we want to pull up, like, is
Yeah,
picture one? Is that your draining
that's mine. That's
table?
a lactic. Yeah. Hmm. So you can see the really soft curd in the molds and how much, and I have to have a bridge there for the whey because it's messy. Um, and then that goes down a central hole in the middle, and I have a bucket on the bottom. But if I make it looks like that was more like a 17-gallon batch, judging from where the line is in the vat. So I started out, and again, this is goat milk. Sheep milk and cow milk would have different yields. Um, Goat milk has a lot of it has more water in it to start with. So if I have a 17-gallon batch of milk, it's not uncommon that I'll have 13 or 14 gallons of whey come off of that by the time it's done. Um, Yield is lower in goat milk. It just is. So
So with those different sizes of molds, sizes and shapes, are you aging them differently, having a different end result, or are those just for different sizes and shapes?
That I can tell based on the way I have it set up. I was probably experimenting to see what shape I liked best and how it would age best. For a long time, I didn't have enough of any particular mold. It took me a long time. Well, the lady I studied with in Italy sent me molds, and they were enough for about half a batch of my vat. So it took me a long time to find more of those. So I would experiment with the different shapes and sizes. I would have them all in the same container to age, but I just, because I tended them minimum once a day, often twice, they just ripened at different rates and then they'd be ready. And I decide which shape I liked best for whatever. I don't know what kind of cheese I was making there. If it was,
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's a bloomy rind because I have the pyramidal ones in there, but.
Yeah, and what I've definitely experienced is with the bloomy rinds in particular, because they age from the outside in, so
Right.
that
The
the
size of your cheese makes a big difference. Yeah.
exactly. So if you have a thinner size wheel, it's going to get that gooiness that you think of, like with brie or something like that.
Right. Pull up
It's
picture 3, Maggie, while you're talking about it, Kevin, because it shows what you're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, and that's because that mold there, you talk about it.
Okay. Well, it's what's called a surface ripened cheese. So it ripens from the outside in. Yeah, the molds start to break down. Here I'm pointing at the picture and you can't see that, sorry. The fats and proteins start to break down, and what the result of that is that delicious, oozy, creamy stuff. But because it's the surface that's touching the mold, that's where it starts and then works its way inward. It starts on the outside. And what happens is if you let it go too far, you basically have mush. You have, and if you're going to get it to sale or to market, you need to give it some time. So, I mean, if you could take it and give it to the customer and say, you need to eat this today, that's ideal, but that's not reality. So that's another downside to those kinds of cheeses, is that they're.
Yeah, it definitely makes distribution and timing and all those things really challenging, because especially if you're selling it to a retail store that's going to have it on a shelf for a while,
Exactly.
and they want you to tell you exactly how long, and then the customer is going to have it in their fridge for a while. So yeah, and ours are probably a little bit more shelf stable than those. Like our camembert and burnt oak, which is a camembert with a burr oak
Yeah,
charcoal
that's
layer.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
because you can control the stability a little bit also by how much you drain it, like we talked about. And I liked mine on a moist side. So I I'd give up that control for what I wanted in the cheese, which was stupid, but you're smarter. And I did want to say, we're sorry, everybody. If it weren't for COVID, we'd probably have all these cheeses out for you to taste, but blame COVID.
yeah. And do we need to move on to questions, Maggie, or should we just keep chattering? Because we haven't made it very far in the process. We talked a little bit about aging there with the surface ripened.
I think if folks have any questions, go ahead and add a question to the chat box, or I'm gonna, you guys are able to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question to Lois and or Kevin. Go ahead and unmute yourselves and ask.
Put picture 2 up just for fun.
Sure. Do you want me to put that one up?
Yeah. Just because because it's fun, and this is how it starts, people. Kevin, I'm sure you've run into this. I can't tell you how many people would come to me and they didn't understand that you have to have a baby before you have milk, just like in people. So that was Sock Monkey having a kid, and she got up to take a little break because the hard part was done. And I always think it looks a little funny.
That's a pretty
Lois,
funny picture.
Yeah.
we have 8 Nigerian dwarf does,
Mhm.
and we're in the process of breeding them right now. And how much milk can you expect per goat per day?
Nigerians are much more difficult to say because Nigerians are behind in production breeding. They've been good pet breeds for so long, or home milkers for so long. So I've got some Nigerians, and they're not nearly as productive as I'd like, but I did invest in a really good buck this year with production genetics. And I'd say that's the only way to increase your production, is to really invest. And there's a whole line called Sugar Moon. I don't know if you've looked at that breeder. It's the original breeder sold the whole herd, but Sugar Moon goat Nigerians are considered nationwide the best production Nigerians there are. If you look at the top 10 for production, they're pretty much 5 of the top 10. So with that caveat, I don't know if you know your genetics or your breeding, but my Nigerians have given me anywhere from a quart a day to a gallon a day.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
they're,
I mean, I
they're
don't
not
have
as
it.
standardized. Yeah, they're just not as standardized yet. The advantage of Nigerians for cheese making is that the solids are a lot higher, so your yield is better. That's why I added them to my herd, was to just improve my yield a little bit. But it's really, really hard to make to get enough milk from my Nigerians to make it commercially.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah, but it honestly, Nigerian milk is the best tasting milk there is, and it's my favorite to drink. And if I was just, I love La Manchas, that's why I still have them. But the Nigerian milk would be by far my favorite to work with for cheese. So. And you'll have better success because the solids are higher. It's not going to be quite as fragile as like what I talked about. So by all means, make cheese with your Nigerian milk.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question about what you each do with your whey.
Pull up
Kevin?
picture 15.
The cute.
So we have pigs, and we feed our whey to pigs. Is the answer?
And I didn't. Oh, baby, I didn't have the place for pigs at the time, nor the energy. So I had other pastured pork producers that would come pick up my whey. I would save it in 5-gallon buckets, which was very messy. Sometimes it'd be 55-gallon buckets a week that they'd picked up. We eventually got to a tank system, but now I have pigs. So, but they're not the eating kind. They're the friend kind. So, but they still like whey.
we use 5-gallon buckets for our whey, and
do you? Okay.
I carry a lot of buckets.
Yeah.
And I wash a lot of buckets.
Oh, because they get nasty.
And I, before I bring them back into the cheese room, I want to make sure that they are clean. So
oh, absolutely.
But I try to have the whey buckets not really even leave the milking parlor. So I mix up my pig feed by the either right outside or near the milking parlor.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
get pig manure on them. So I'm actually transferring it to a different bucket. So I soak the pig feed in
and that's
whey
what I did
for 12 hours.
Yeah. Moved it to a different bucket. Yeah, you don't want to carry it down by the pigs, but yeah.
Right. Yep.
You're
So,
going to have way more whey. That wasn't an intentional joke, but then you realize also. So I thought, oh, I can use it in different things. Well, no, you're going to have. What's the typical yield, Kevin, percentage wise for a cow's milk cheese? Is it like 12% weight wise?
if it's going to range anywhere from like 8% for a really really hard cheese, like a Parmesan, to maybe 15% for a real fresh high moisture cheese.
Yeah.
Most of mine are probably in the 10 to 12 range.
So you figure if you guys have 100 pounds of milk, you're going to have 90 pounds of whey.
Yeah. And so where that works out for, if you're not thinking about pounds, because in the dairy industry, everything is by pounds for some reason. And so that's 10% by weight. And a gallon of milk is 8.6 generally is about 8.6 pounds of cow's milk. So for hard cheese, I say generally about I get about a pound of cheese for a gallon of milk, but roughly. And so if I do 100-gallon batch of milk, I'm going to have 100 gallons. I'm going to have at least 90 gallons of whey by the end.
Yeah. I see a good question. Oops.
Go ahead, Lois.
Get out of this. About the equipment. That's a really difficult subject because it also depends on what size of equipment you want. Kevin,
so that everyone's aware, the question in the chat
I'm
box.
sorry.
No, you're fine. Where did you get your equipment when you were setting up and getting started? Continue, Lois.
Did you, was yours Micro Dairy Designs, Kevin, or did you get used equipment that?
I got used equipment. So Mark Armstrong of Acoustic Farms was doing a similar scale farm or cow dairy that I'm to what I'm doing now. And he was getting out a few years before we were getting in. And we bought all of his milking equipment and his cheese vat, pasteurizer.
You got the whole package. Yeah.
The whole package. We had to buy some work table, some stainless steel tables, and bought a cheese press a few years in, molds, a lot of other things we had to buy still. I bought all my molds from a Canadian company called Fromagex.
That's the main place to go. Yeah.
They have really good stuff. For hobby scale, you can get stuff from cheesemaking.com, which used to be New England Cheesemaking Supply, or Dairy Connection, which is where I get all my cultures. They have a lot of cheesemaking supplies and molds, cheese molds and stuff like that. But if you're going to get it on a larger scale, Fromagex is the place to go, and they have all kinds of stuff, from knives, cheese knives, to cheese molds, and all kinds of equipment.
Yeah. For home, did you say this while I was gone? For home use, like Dairy Connection and cheesemaker.com are your best.
Yep. And I said those are good places to get cultures as well.
Exactly.
Cultures and rennet and things like that, and cheese salt.
And for fresh cheeses, cheesecloth, the right kind of cheesecloth and stuff like that. So
but so my pasteurizer is from Darlington Dairy Supply, which is in Darlington, Wisconsin, which is maybe a 5-hour drive away, but so they've been really helpful. I can call them on the phone to troubleshoot things or to get new parts, or they actually sent a tech down to get it in place, and I had to have some transfer lines welded in place, and so they had a food grade welder who came and did that. Was not cheap, but it's all the price of getting started in dairy is.
Another good website, because goat equipment is generally quite a bit smaller and it's harder to find. There's a company called Micro Dairy Designs that's quite good, and he's been out for quite a while now, and he sometimes has used equipment. And I think there's a website called microdairy.com that has a lot of information, and they also have a sales page where you can often find used equipment there. And there on Facebook, there are different cheese making groups you can join, and they often list equipment. That's where I listed my equipment when I retired. So it's, all the equipment, if you really want to be commercial state, licensed cheesemaker, it's expensive. So there's
Yes, it is.
no going around that. It doesn't matter if you're only milking 10 goats, you have to meet all the same criteria as somebody milking 1,200 cows. So
yeah,
the only exception, as that Ethan Book and I have discussed, Ethan, here's my joke. If you want to convert to Amish for the dairy, they have they don't have to meet quite all the same standards for whatever reason, but you'd have to convert your religion. So
we had another question in the chat box that we skipped over. Someone was asking, they wanted to know a little bit more about the process you follow to milk only once a day.
So the easy answer is I just only milk once a day.
Do you leave the calves on in the beginning?
So we leave all the calves on for a week, but most of the bull calves get sold at that point, at a week old, and heifer calves stay on for 6 months. You can Maggie, you can go ahead and put picture 14 on just because it's fun, so by the time they're 6 months old, they're taking, depending on the cow, almost all of her milk. And there are other challenges with that, but I guess with our production levels, we are able to we don't have problems with once a day, even with some of our most productive cows. We did have to do a little bit of culling early on with a couple, some really productive cows that just really didn't work in the once a day system, and we're having milk quality issues.
And I think, that's the key right there. You have to know your animals, and if you had a Holstein, that probably wouldn't work. But an average normal normal good producer, not an extreme producer, can handle once a day without much issue.
But those Holsteins wouldn't be able to handle 100% grass fed probably either.
No, that's true. That's true. That's another extremely good point. Your inputs change if you want, because even when I switched to once a day in the goats, I cut back on their alfalfa quite a bit. They don't eat that other, they're not getting grain but once a day, so that helps a little bit. And I don't push water as hard. If I really need to slow them down, I'll start just not keeping the water as high as it needs to be, just to slow them down a little bit. But
interesting.
And every animal is going to be different too, as far as, like when I switch from twice a day to once a day, some adjust within 3 days. Others, it'll take 2 weeks before they get sorted and aren't coming in spraying milk everywhere. So, and that's, I guess, Kevin, where your culling comes in as well. So
yeah, and I know a lot of seasonal cow dairies will do twice a day, maybe for the first 3 months. sort of through peak production and then shift to once a day, which that would be more challenging with sort of calving spread out throughout the year. So we have calving starting in mid-March, going through mid-November, kind of spread out throughout there. And we do that on purpose to have it staggered and have some cows fresh and some cows later in lactation, because they produce more when they're fresher,
Right.
and they generally have less problems with milk quality and so forth. We do avoid calving in the winter because we don't have a barn to put our cows in. I mean, we have wind protection and one place to keep them dry, but we don't really have enough room for all our cows to be in there, and it's still open on one side. So,
well, we have come to the end of our hour. So thank you, Lois and Kevin, so much for taking the time to participate in this news session and have a conversation about all things cheese. I know that it was quite the challenge to narrow in on like what it is that you wanted to share and chat about cheese related. So thank you for participating, and thank you everyone for joining us in this session.